Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here, it's really sharp and singular. We take the source material you've shared with us, and we conduct a rational inquiry. We're looking into motive, meaning, and those deep behavioral drivers behind complex human actions.
Exactly. We're not just recounting events.
No, definitely not. We're trying to understand let's say, the architecture of decision-making, especially when people are under immense pressure.
And with this particular set of sources, that architecture is, well, it's incredibly complex, fascinatingly so.
It really is.
These sources, they really force us to step back, to question the very tools we use to judge human behavior, our assumptions about time, about emotion, even about how the law functions in these situations.
Right.
Our focus today, it's going to be squarely on the gaps, the inconsistencies, those points where things just don't quite line up, where someone's rights and maybe their moral duties seem to clash, or where, genuine trauma looks almost identical to strategic planning.
That tension is palpable in the materials, isn't it? It jumps off the page. So we're diving into three big themes today, areas that really reveal this sophisticated structure. Maybe we call it an architecture of denial.
Or perhaps, more neutrally, an architecture of comprehensive legal self-protection.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Our goal isn't to solve what happened. It's to really get a handle on why the response unfolded like this, using delay, using performance, and using this kind of legal insulation as these primary overlapping tools.
Makes sense.
Okay, let's start unpacking that. The first tool seems almost passive, but it might be the most powerful. Our first theme, the currency of time when delay becomes strategy.
Mm-hmm.
The core fact here, the one that just stares you in the face, is that gap. 4 months. You have the immediate CNN interview, raw, emotional, right after the event.
Very public.
Very public. Then silence. 4 months go by before the first formal police interviews. And those are, carefully controlled, lawyers present, everything negotiated.
Yeah. And that timeline, just by itself, it tells a story, doesn't it? The logical progression is pretty clear. You go from this spontaneous, highly emotional public moment, which legally is often incredibly risky.
It's extremely vulnerable.
Right. And it shifts very quickly to calculated control. That decision to hold off on formal cooperation for 4 whole months, it shows a deep awareness, conscious or not, that time isn't just neutral. It can be used. It can be, weaponized.
So time bought preparation. Time to see what the police might know, time to think through answers, time to make sure every statement, public or private, fits within a legal strategy.
It's an immediate signal of strategy. Now, whether that strategy is purely defensive against perceived hostility or defensive against revealing something else, that's the question.
Exactly. And that's the core dilemma, isn't it? The logical function of delay is straightforward preparation. But, and we really need to stress this, preparation helps both sides equally.
It really does.
It helps an innocent person build a shield, right? Avoid getting railroaded, make sure their rights are protected, maybe just get psychologically stable enough to talk coherently.
Absolutely. Trauma does strange things to memory and communication.
But that same delay, functionally, it also serves someone who might be guilty. It gives them time to build defenses, to obscure things, to avoid exposure. The behavior itself, the 4-month wait, looks identical from the outside, no matter the truth inside.
This leads us straight into the philosophical mess.
Yeah, it does, because we have this gut feeling, don't we? Yeah. This societal assumption that if someone speaks immediately, unfiltered, it's more likely to be true. Spontaneity equals honesty.
We equate speed with truth.
We do, but that creates an immediate problem. Does filtering information automatically mean you're lying?
Well, no, not necessarily. As the sources suggest, filtering could just mean clarification. It could mean trying to make sense of something utterly overwhelming before you speak. The Ramseys could argue, hypothetically, that those 4 months weren't about building lies, but about getting stable enough to tell a traumatic truth accurately.
Without being misunderstood or manipulated in that high-pressure police interview setting.
Exactly, which brings up a really tough ethical point.
Do we, as a society, or as investigators, have the right to demand immediate raw access to people who are clearly in shock, in crisis?
Or does basic compassion and, frankly, adherence to civil rights mean we have to allow time for psychological stabilization, even if it compromises the investigation?
It's a genuine paradox. There's no easy answer. On one hand, you want that fresh, maybe uncorrupted memory, the immediate truth.
The golden hour evidence.
Right. But on the other hand, you have the ethical reality that people in deep crisis are vulnerable. They might be unreliable narrators. They might be susceptible to suggestion. Philosophy just highlights how both sides have a legitimate claim here, and they pull in opposite directions.
Let's dig into the psychology and even the physiology behind that delay.
Yeah.
Because those 4 months, they served some really powerful functions regardless of motive.
Okay.
For someone genuinely traumatized, time lets that initial shock, that panic, kind of metabolize. It lets the brain start to piece together a coherent story from what was probably just fragments, just chaos.
We need narratives to function, right?
Yeah.
Humans can't live with just chaos in their heads.
Precisely. So metabolizing shock, building a narrative that makes some kind of sense, getting emotional regulation back online, these are normal, healthy parts of trauma recovery.
Okay, that makes sense for an innocent person dealing with horror. But what's the flip side?
Well, here's the psychological trap. That exact same time interval, those same processes, can also allow for the hardening of a defensive narrative. Whether the defense is against, say, unfair accusations or against confronting one's own actions. Time allows for what psychologists call motivated reasoning. It's largely unconscious. The mind starts building justifications, filling in gaps in ways that protect the ego, that shield it from something unbearable.
And if you repeat that story enough, to yourself, to lawyers, maybe in controlled statements?
It starts to feel completely true. Even if it's drifted significantly from the initial reality, the brain seeks consistency.
And we need to talk about the actual biology here, memory consolidation. Because trauma memories aren't like normal memories, are they?
Not at all. Under extreme stress, the biochemistry is different. Memories get laid down in fragments. They're often disjointed, emotionally charged, but maybe lacking sequence or detail. The brain then has to actively work over time to reconstruct them, to try and make them coherent.
It fills in the blanks.
It has to. That's just neurobiology. It's unavoidable. The memory physically changes over time as it gets consolidated and reconsolidated.
But that same natural process, that need to fill the gaps, that can be exploited.
It can, consciously or unconsciously. The reconstruction process can reshape inconvenient details, smooth out contradictions. It allows a version of events to get rehearsed and rehearsed until it feels deeply authentic, deeply ingrained. So by the time those formal interviews happen 4 months later, their memories were different than they would have been on day 1 or day 2.
And we're left stuck.
Yeah.
Was that change just the normal, unavoidable process of trauma memory consolidation? Or was it strategic revision?
We can't know for sure, which from a forensic criminology standpoint is devastating.
The sources are really clear on this. 4 months is described as a catastrophic loss of investigative opportunity.
Absolutely catastrophic. Regardless of why the delay happened, the damage to the investigation is immense.
Talk about the golden hours.
Those first hours, maybe the first day or two after a major event, are critical. That's when you get spontaneous statements, unfiltered reactions. You see raw behavior before defenses go up. Physical evidence is less likely to be disturbed or degraded.
Letting 4 months pass basically ensures the trail goes cold. Witnesses' memories fade or change. Physical traces disappear or become ambiguous.
It's an investigative nightmare. And the question that hangs over everything is, did this nightmare happen because innocent people were legitimately exercising rights against what they saw as a hostile system? Or was it a calculated move to make sure that by the time they did talk, the investigation was already crippled?
Which brings us to the power dimension, the anthropological angle.
Yes, structural power. It's crucial here.
Let's make it real for the listener. Imagine someone from a lower socioeconomic background, maybe without powerful connections. If they're a suspect, can they just say, I'll talk to you in 4 months after I've hired a team?
Absolutely not. They're likely pressured for immediate statements, maybe held, maybe interrogated without counsel present for long periods. Their timeline is dictated by the system, not by them.
So the ability to actually enforce a 4-month delay, to retreat, hire top lawyers, PR people, investigators, negotiate the terms of engagement, that is fundamentally a privilege.
It's a privilege of their social position, as the sources put it. This doesn't automatically mean guilt, not at all, but it highlights a stark inequality in how justice operates. The resources they had allowed them to control the timeline in a way most people simply couldn't.
It created barriers others can't afford.
Exactly.
So to sum up this whole theme of time, the delay, the 4 months, it perfectly served the needs of someone trying to strategically avoid accountability. But it also perfectly served the needs of innocent people terrified of being railroaded.
The behavior itself is strategically ambiguous. It creates a smokescreen that paralyzes easy interpretation. Time was weaponized, intentionally or not.
Okay, so if time obscured things, what about emotion? That's something we think we can read, right? Let's shift to our second theme, The performance of suffering when grief becomes theater.
Ah, yes. This is maybe even trickier, ethically speaking.
Why is that?
Because grief isn't standardized. There's no rule book for how someone should mourn. Yet, as observers, we carry these expectations. We expect tears, visible anguish, maybe collapsing in public.
And if we don't see that,
We get suspicious immediately. But the logical first step should be to question our own assumptions. Is our suspicion based on their lack of authentic feeling or on our narrow cultural script for what grief is supposed to look like?
logic also says we need to look at the context of the emotional display. And the sources point out a pretty clear pattern here.
They do. The grief seemed most visible, most raw in those controlled public settings. The CNN interview, other staged appearances designed to shape public opinion.
But in the formal investigative settings, where cooperation might actually help solve the crime.
There, the presentation was reportedly quite different. Guarded, restrained, legalistic, much less emotionally open.
So this idea of selective deployment of grief, choosing which face to show depending on the audience and the stakes.
That phrase really captures the pattern suggested by the sources. The grieving parent persona for the cameras, the legally protected client persona for the investigators.
Which throws us back to philosophy, doesn't it? Socrates asking about being versus seeming. Was this just natural compartmentalization? I mean, we all act differently with different people.
Sure, we present different facets of ourselves. That's normal.
Or was it strategic? Performing the emotion that achieves a specific goal in public sympathy, belief, while staying guarded when facing potential accusation.
Well, modern existential thought might say we're always performing versions of ourselves, so maybe the public grief was just the region they needed to express externally. But phenomenology, the study of experience, suggests genuine, deep emotion often has a quality of immediacy, involuntariness. It sort of leaks out, unplanned.
And the question is, did those public displays have that quality? Or did they feel even slightly managed, calculated?
That's the interpretive challenge. But I want to push back slightly on the idea of pure calculation because the psychology here is complex.
Okay.
Psychology tells us that sometimes people in genuine, profound grief need to perform it publicly, not to manipulate, but because they desperately crave external validation. They need the world to see their pain, to confirm their status as victims, to share the load.
So going on CNN might not have been strategy, but just a raw human need. An attempt to make the unbearable suffering real to others, to get support.
It absolutely could be a desperate attempt to externalize agony. That's not manipulation, that's a coping mechanism, a very human one.
There's always the shadow side, isn't there? The defensive function.
Always. By controlling how and when the grief is displayed, you can shape the narrative. A powerful public display of anguish makes it harder for people to ask tough questions later.
It creates an emotional shield. Skepticism starts to feel cruel, inappropriate.
Exactly. It's what some call affect management. Using emotional displays, consciously or not, to manage how others perceive you and respond to you, to neutralize hostility before it even forms.
And again, the behavior itself, the televised tears, could serve either purpose, genuine need, or strategic defense.
Making psychological analysis based purely on observed emotion incredibly unreliable in this context. It's forensically ambiguous.
Now, add the physiology. The body reacts differently in different situations. Right?
Dramatically differently. Think about the stress response. A public performance like CNN, that's high stakes, adrenaline-fueled. The sympathetic nervous system is firing. That can actually amplify emotional displays, make tears flow more easily, make the voice tremble.
It's a performance state.
Right. Now contrast that with a formal police interview, especially months later, with lawyers present facing potential accusation. That's not a performance state, it's a threat state.
Cortisol kicks in. Defensive posture.
Exactly. High cortisol, the body preparing for danger. Physiologically, this often suppresses outward emotional expression. It can lead to a flattened effect, someone seeming guarded, cold, maybe even disconnected, even if internally they're in turmoil.
So wait, genuine grief could actually look more intense in the public setting due to adrenaline, and look less intense, more flat, in the threatening police setting due to cortisol.
Precisely. The physiological context completely changes the outward appearance of the same underlying emotional state.
Which just destroys the forensic value of comparing emotional displays across contexts. Investigators looking for consistency are thwarted by basic biology.
Forensic criminology often relies on assessing emotional congruence. Does the emotion match the story? But if the subjects only show strong emotion in supportive media settings and are flat or guarded in adversarial ones, They're effectively preventing that assessment. They control the data investigators get.
We also need to consider the cultural context here, the anthropology.
Yes. In the 1990s, especially for high-profile, wealthy individuals, managing the media during a crisis wasn't unusual. It was almost expected.
It was part of the playbook for people in their position. Hiring media consultants wasn't necessarily a sign of guilt. It was just what you did to control the narrative and protect your image.
It was normalized within that specific social stratum.
Okay, but let's put on the criminal mindset hat for a second. From that perspective, what does public grief achieve?
It achieves several things. It establishes victim status immediately. It generates enormous public sympathy. And crucially, it creates an emotional barrier. It makes it harder for people, including investigators perhaps, to even consider accusing someone who appears so devastated.
That CNN appearance was incredibly powerful in shaping perception early on.
Immensely powerful. It created an enduring image. This is classic effective manipulation if viewed through that lens. But again, the paradox holds.
Innocent people also need to show their grief publicly, to prove they're human, to demand justice, to put pressure on authorities.
They almost have to perform grief to avoid suspicion of coldness.
So we're trapped in this moral bind when analyzing grief. If we suspect every display is strategic, we lose our ability to connect, to empathize.
It makes human connection impossible.
But if we accept every display at face value, we're vulnerable to being manipulated. And in this case, by selectively displaying emotion, the line between genuine and strategic became, for all practical purposes, invisible.
Another perfect strategic smokescreen, intentional or not. The ambiguity served to protect, regardless of the underlying truth.
Which leads us directly to the final and maybe the most concrete tool, the legal fortress and the moral void.
Right. The use of the legal system itself.
The facts here are stark. Lawyers hired almost immediately. Conditions for interviews tightly controlled, exercising every single legal right available to the absolute fullest extent.
Now, logically, step back from this specific case. For any person facing a serious investigation, innocent or guilty, this is just smart legal strategy.
Get a lawyer, protect your rights.
Absolutely. The legal system is adversarial. The state has immense power. Counsel is there to balance that, to prevent mistakes driven by stress or trauma like false confessions, which do happen.
So it's necessary protection.
Yes, but logic also dictates that these exact same protective strategies, controlling access, limiting questioning, advising silence, systematically create barriers to finding the truth. And those barriers serve guilty parties extremely well.
So the tension is built right into the system. Individual rights versus the collective need for truth.
That's the fundamental tension. Individual protection is paramount in our system, but the exercise of those protections can directly impede the search for justice in a specific case.
This really crystallizes a core philosophical dilemma in liberal legal thought, doesn't it? They had the legal right to do everything they did, refuse immediate questioning, set conditions, no question.
None whatsoever.
But did they have a moral obligation, given the horrific nature of the crime involving their child, to cooperate more fully, more immediately, more transparently, to prioritize finding the truth over maximizing their own legal protection?
That's the heart of it. And you can bring in philosophical frameworks here. Think about Kant's categorical imperative. What if everyone acted this way?
What if every parent whose child was harmed immediately lawyered up and refused anything but tightly controlled access?
The system for investigating crimes against children would arguably collapse. Kant would say if the universalization of the act leads to breakdown, the act itself is morally questionable, even if legal.
And from a utilitarian view, greatest good for the greatest number.
Did the aggressive self-protection ultimately produce the best outcome? It protected the family unit, certainly, but did it undermine the wider public interest in achieving justice and deterring future crimes? Legal permission and moral justification are running on different tracks here, and they seem to collide.
Let's talk psychology again, the role of the lawyers. Psychologically, what do they do for a client in that situation?
It's profoundly dual-sided again. For someone innocent and traumatized, the lawyer provides external ego strength. They offer safety, structure. They buffer the client from the overwhelming stress of the investigation. They prevent those trauma-driven mistakes.
A psychological shield.
Definitely. But the inverse is just as true. For someone needing to conceal something, lawyers facilitate that. They help shape the narrative, identify weaknesses in the investigation, prepare answers that minimize risk. They create psychological distance.
They reduce the pressure that might lead to a slip-up. A leakage.
Precisely. The lawyer's presence changes the psychological dynamic entirely. It serves the needs of psychological recovery and the needs of guilt management, often simultaneously.
And does that psychological shield have a physical effect? A physiological one?
Oh, absolutely. And this is critical for forensics. When someone is alone, under stress, being questioned, their autonomic nervous system is often highly active. Heart rate changes, breathing patterns shift, microexpressions might flicker. Investigators look for this data.
Behavioral leakage.
Yes. But bring in the lawyers. The subject feels protected, safer. That sense of safety typically reduces the physiological stress response.
Cortisol drops. Heart rate stabilizes.
Generally, yes. Less physiological arousal. This translates into more composure, fewer visible signs of stress or deception. It makes detecting deception through behavioral analysis much, much harder.
So insisting on lawyer presence wasn't just a legal move. It was, maybe unintentionally, a form of physiological management.
You would certainly see it that way. It helps the innocent person appear calm because they feel safer and less likely to make stress errors. And it helps someone deceptive appear calm because the stress cues are dampened. The outcome, less reliable physiological data for investigators, is the same.
Looking at the whole picture from a forensic criminology perspective, this wasn't just hiring a lawyer. This was, as the sources describe it, a comprehensive defensive operation.
It really was multifaceted. Defense attorneys, yes, but also private investigators, forensic experts challenging the police work, handwriting analysts, media consultants managing the public narrative. They controlled access to evidence, the timing of interviews, even the specific questions they were willing to answer.
Creating what's called a one-way information flow.
Exactly. They could put information out, making claims, accusations, releasing statements, but investigators struggled to get information in to test those claims because access was so tightly controlled by the legal team.
It's all perfectly legal strategy.
Entirely legal, but the practical effect is creating nearly insurmountable investigative barriers. The defensive structure itself became the main obstacle. It made the truth, whatever it was, legally and forensically hard to reach. And we have to come back to the anthropological point here, the structural inequality.
The resources.
The sheer level of resources required to mount and sustain that kind of comprehensive defense. Top lawyers, multiple experts, PR firms, it's astronomical. It's available only to a tiny fraction of the population.
So when the outcome of a case seems to depend so heavily on the ability to afford this legal fortress,
it calls into question the whole idea of equal protection under the law. It suggests that justice, in practice, can be heavily influenced by economic power. The failure to solve this case might be as much about that structural privilege as about the specific facts.
And finally, the criminal mindset lens. What's the goal of this comprehensive defensive insulation?
From that perspective, the goal is total protection, to build layers legal, psychological, procedural so thick that revelation becomes impossible. To make the barriers to discovering the truth, if there's something to hide, simply too high to overcome. The system's focus on individual rights, when combined with immense resources, can be turned into a nearly perfect shield.
Which brings us to what you call the moral void.
Yes, because the Ramseys did everything the law allowed them to do. They maximized their rights. If they are innocent, this was necessary, justifiable self-defense against a potentially hostile system. If they are not, it was a brilliant, legally sanctioned evasion of accountability.
And the problem is,
the system itself can't tell the difference. The actions look identical from the outside. Maximizing legal rights serves both innocence and guilt equally well in terms of blocking investigation. And that's the fundamental, maybe tragic ambiguity at the heart of a rights-based justice system.
So we've journeyed through these layers. Time used strategically, delaying and obscuring, emotion becoming ambiguous, performative, forensically unreliable. And the legal system itself, its rights and protections, used to build an impenetrable fortress.
We've seen how time, emotion, and law can be tools, either weapons or shields, depending on your perspective, and maybe depending on the hidden truth, creating this constant state of ambiguity that just paralyzes any easy conclusion.
It seems the ultimate sophistication here wasn't just managing one aspect, but controlling every dimension of the investigation, the clock, the perception, the legal access.
And I think the real takeaway from this deep dive looking at these sources is that the biggest, most profound questions aren't just about what happened that night. They're about the systemic processes, the psychological dynamics that allow truth, whatever it may be, to get buried so deep under these layers of strategy and legal architecture.
It forces us to look at the system itself.
It does. And it leaves us with a really challenging thought, something for you, the listener, to wrestle with.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the full, complete, entirely legal exercise of every single right available under our system can lead to a situation where accountability is effectively impossible, where justice might be evaded, does that point to a fundamental flaw in the system's design?
A flaw that maybe inherently privileges structural power, economic resources, over a moral obligation to truth.
Or is this ambiguity, this risk of evasion, simply the necessary, unavoidable price we must pay to ensure that we protect every innocent person from the power of the state? Which ambiguity is harder for you to accept? The possibility that innocent people under traumatic stress had to use these extreme measures to protect themselves, or the possibility that the system itself enables strategic guilt to hide behind perfectly legal maneuvers?
That's a heavy question. Is the potential failure of justice in one case the cost of liberty for all?
It's a question with no easy answer, but one this case forces us to confront.
A profound and necessary place to end. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the architecture of denial, the performance of suffering, and the moral complexities of legal protection. Keep thinking, keep questioning, continue your own inquiry.